Welcome, and we hope the very best comes your way. Let us know your thoughts on our latest story. And don't forget to tell us which city you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. As you listen to this tale, think about the unspoken bonds that can change lives forever. Chapter 1. A Life Rewritten. It was a chilly autumn evening in Denver, Colorado. The city was covered in the golden glow of the setting sun, its skyline against the orange and purple hues painting a picture of serenity. Jacob Walker, a 39-year-old former police officer, stood in front of the animal shelter. His heavy boots echoed against the cold pavement, each step dragging the weight of the life he had been living since his return from a war zone. He had served in the military for nearly 2 decades, and the scars, both seen and unseen, had begun to take their toll. For the past 2 years, Jacob had tried everything to fill the empty space within him, the space left behind by his experiences, by the friends he had lost, and by the war itself. He'd taken up civilian jobs, gone through therapy, even tried to adjust to the life of a man who no longer wore a badge. But nothing seemed to work. The ghost of his past lingered in every corner of his mind, and he felt like a stranger in his own life. Then, at the suggestion of his sister Anna, Jacob found himself here, standing outside the shelter. She had convinced him that adopting a dog could help him heal. Anna had been right about many things in the past, but he wasn't sure if this could work. After all, how could he offer love and companionship to an animal when he was still trying to figure out how to love himself? Inside the shelter, the rows of cages stretched before him. The sounds of barking dogs filled the space, some excited, some mournful. Each dog seemed to beg for attention, but none of them caught Jacob's eye. He walked slowly, scanning the faces of the animals as if searching for something, or someone, who might reach out to him. But just as he was about to give up, a shelter worker approached. "Mr. Walker," she said, her voice gentle, "we have a German Shepherd in the back. He came in a few weeks ago. I think he might be the one you're looking for." A German Shepherd? Jacob's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected to find that kind of breed here. His mind flashed back to the good old days when he had worked side by side with K-9s in the force. The loyalty, the bond, they were part of the family. He followed the woman to the back, feeling a flicker of hope, something that had been absent for far too long. In the far corner of the shelter, there was a large dog. His black and tan fur was a familiar sight, but his posture was stiff. The German Shepherd lay motionless, his eyes staring blankly ahead. Jacob's breath caught in his throat. Could it be? His heart pounded in his chest. "Rex?" Jacob whispered, taking a step closer. The dog's ears twitched, but there was no recognition in his eyes. He didn't move. He didn't even wag his tail. He simply stared at Jacob, like a stranger. The sight hit Jacob like a punch to the gut. He crouched down, a wave of disappointment washing over him. This wasn't the way it was supposed to be. The memories of Rex, his old partner from the police force, came rushing back. Rex had been his constant companion through dangerous assignments. Together, they had faced unimaginable situations, and Rex had saved Jacob's life more times than he could count. But now, Rex had no idea who he was. As Jacob sat there, trying to make sense of the emotions flooding through him, the shelter worker explained, "He was found abandoned after an incident. He's been through a lot. Trust is hard for him now. He's been trained, but the trauma," her voice trailed off. Jacob's eyes met the dog's, and something inside him clicked. He wasn't going to give up, not now. He stood up slowly, walking toward Rex, who remained frozen in place. Jacob's voice cracked slightly as he spoke. "Come on, boy, it's me, Jacob, your partner." At the sound of his voice, something shifted. Rex blinked, his nostrils flared, and for the briefest moment, his posture relaxed. But it wasn't enough. He still didn't recognize Jacob fully. The shelter worker sighed, her eyes sad. "It's going to take time," she said softly, "but he's a fighter, just like you." Jacob nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. This wasn't just about adopting a dog. It was about finding his way back to who he was. And maybe, just maybe, Rex could help him get there. "I'll take him," Jacob said firmly, surprising himself with the resolve in his voice. "No matter how long it takes. I'll bring him home." Chapter 2. Trust Rebuilt. The drive home was eerily quiet. Jacob kept glancing at the rearview mirror, watching Rex shift uncomfortably in the back seat. The German Shepherd sat there, his large body tense, eyes focused out the window, avoiding any direct contact with Jacob. It had been a long time since Jacob had felt so alone. Even with someone else in the car, the silence felt like a heavy weight pressing down on him. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. For years, Jacob had worked alongside Rex, building a bond that had been tested in the most dangerous of situations. They had relied on each other more times than Jacob cared to admit. Rex had been the one constant, the one being who had always been there. And now, in this quiet moment, Jacob couldn't help but feel the vast distance that had formed between them. He had saved Rex from countless dangers. But now, it felt like Rex didn't recognize him at all. When they reached Jacob's home, a modest house just outside of Denver, the tension in the truck didn't dissipate. Jacob parked in the driveway and got out, trying his best to hide his uncertainty. He had set up a small space for Rex near the corner of the living room with a dog bed, water bowl, and a few toys he'd bought on the way home. He had hoped that Rex would settle in and feel some comfort. But the dog seemed like a shell of the animal Jacob had known. "Come on, buddy," Jacob said softly, opening the door. Rex hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting around as though searching for an escape route. Jacob could feel the anxiety radiating off him. After a few moments, Rex stepped cautiously out of the truck, his paws barely making a sound on the gravel as he followed Jacob to the door. Inside, the house felt unfamiliar to both of them. Jacob had lived here alone for years, but the absence of the dog he had known so well made it feel emptier than ever. He took a deep breath and walked over to the corner where he had prepared a space for Rex. "This is your spot now," Jacob said with a forced smile. But Rex didn't seem to care. Instead, he stayed near the door, sniffing the air warily. Jacob's frustration was building. He had been through so much, fought to come home, and now this. He couldn't even get Rex to trust him. The dog who had once greeted him with excitement and loyalty now couldn't even look him in the eye. "Come on, Rex," Jacob muttered under his breath. "You were my partner. You're still my partner. Don't you remember?" But Rex didn't move. Jacob sighed, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on him. As much as he wanted to push, he knew this would take time. He couldn't force it, just like he couldn't force himself to heal. They both needed space, but Jacob was determined to rebuild what they had. That night, Jacob left the bedroom door open, hoping Rex would feel comfortable enough to join him. When he turned off the lights, he listened carefully. The soft sound of Rex's paws on the floor told him the dog was near. But he didn't come closer. He lay down at the door, keeping his distance, and Jacob felt a small sense of relief. It wasn't much, but it was something, a small step. In the morning, Jacob woke up to the sight of Rex sitting near the door. The dog's ears perked as he stared at Jacob, his eyes still distant, but for a moment, there was something in them, a hint of recognition. Maybe. Jacob smiled weakly, feeling a flicker of hope. "Morning, buddy," he said softly. Rex didn't respond, but he didn't leave either. Jacob spent the rest of the day trying to reach out to Rex. He threw a tennis ball across the yard, but Rex just watched it bounce away. Uninterested, Jacob placed food in front of him, but the dog only approached it once Jacob had left the room. It was clear that the trust had been shattered, and it wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. That evening, Jacob sat down in front of Rex with a worn military vest he had kept from his time in the force. The scent of sand, sweat, and battle still lingered on the fabric. It was a symbol of the past, of the bond they had once shared. "Do you remember this, boy?" Jacob said quietly, holding it up. Rex looked at the vest, his nostrils flaring as he took in the familiar scent. For a brief moment, Jacob thought he saw something in the dog's eyes, a flicker of recognition. But then Rex turned away, retreating to the corner of the room. Jacob's heart sank. This was harder than he thought. But he wasn't ready to give up, not yet. He needed to be patient, to give Rex the time he needed to heal. But how long would that take? How long until the dog he knew and loved returned to him? What do you think? Will Jacob and Rex be able to rebuild their bond? Or is the trauma too deep for both of them to overcome? Chapter 3. The Road to Healing. Jacob woke up the next morning to the soft, hesitant sound of paws padding on the floor. Rex was at the foot of his bed, staring at him from the shadows. It wasn't the usual greeting he was used to, but it was a small step. Jacob stretched and smiled. though the pain of what they were both going through still lingered deep in his chest. He couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness when he looked at Rex. This was not the dog he had come home to. "Hey, buddy," Jacob whispered, reaching a hand out to touch Rex's head. But the dog quickly stepped back. Jacob could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Rex wasn't the same, and neither was he. The war had left its scars on both of them, and despite the longing Jacob had to reconnect, he understood it wasn't going to happen overnight. Jacob decided to take it slow. He wasn't going to rush Rex, but he couldn't ignore the silence that hung between them. That afternoon, he decided to take Rex for a walk. It was a simple thing, but maybe it would help break the ice. He grabbed the leash and approached Rex slowly, trying to keep his movements calm and inviting. But when Rex saw the leash, he stepped back, his body tense and uncertain. "It's okay, Rex," Jacob said softly, crouching down to the dog's level. "We're going for a walk. Just like old times. Nothing to be afraid of." Rex hesitated, eyeing Jacob warily, before finally allowing him to clip the leash on. Jacob opened the door and led Rex outside. But the dog didn't run ahead as he used to. Instead, Rex stayed close to Jacob's side, his head low, every step measured, as if expecting something to jump out from the shadows at any moment. It was clear Rex didn't trust him yet, and that broke Jacob's heart. They walked around the yard, each step feeling heavier than the last. Jacob tried to engage Rex with playful words, but the dog barely reacted. It was as if he was somewhere far away, lost in his own thoughts. Jacob couldn't help but think about how they used to work as a team. Their bond had been forged in the heat of battle, in moments where they had relied on each other for survival. And now, all that was left was the void between them. As they walked, Jacob saw the slight tremor in Rex's body, a subtle reminder of the trauma the dog had been through. Rex had been through so much. Just like him, they had both been forced to face battles that neither of them had been prepared for. And neither of them had emerged unscathed. Jacob wondered if Rex could understand his own pain, if maybe that would be the key to rebuilding their trust. Later that evening, Jacob found himself sitting in the living room, staring at the walls, lost in thought. Rex had taken his usual place in the corner, lying still but alert, keeping an eye on Jacob from a distance. Jacob had hoped for more, but he understood that this was progress in itself. Small steps. The thought of how far they had come from the dog who had once bounded happily toward him, eager for attention, seemed almost unreal now, but he couldn't dwell on that. He needed to stay focused. Rex needed him now more than ever, just as Jacob needed him. Jacob decided to try something different. Instead of focusing on trying to get Rex to react, he took a seat on the floor and began to clean his gear, his old military vest, the one that had seen so many battles, and his service jacket. He wasn't expecting Rex to do anything, but he wanted to see if the familiar sense of their past together might help trigger something. He could still remember how Rex had reacted to this vest when it was first taken off after a mission. The dog used to nudge it, sniffing it intently, as if remembering the adrenaline and fear of those dangerous days. After some time, Rex slowly walked over to the pile of clothes, sniffing the air carefully. He paused for a long moment, his nose twitching slightly. Jacob stayed still, waiting, watching. Rex stepped forward and sniffed at the vest. Jacob's heart raced in his chest. The dog nudged it gently with his nose. And for the first time in what felt like ages, Jacob saw something in Rex's eyes, a brief flicker of recognition. But just as quickly, the moment passed. Rex stepped back, his tail tucked between his legs, and returned to the corner of the room. It wasn't much, but it was enough for Jacob to hold on to. They had made a small step forward, and that was all that mattered. The following day, Jacob woke up with a new resolve. He decided it was time to push forward, but carefully. No more waiting for Rex to come to him. He needed to meet the dog halfway. The road to healing wasn't going to be easy, but he had to try. He spent the day organizing their space, getting it ready for the possibility of making Rex feel more at home. He placed his own scent on the dog's bed, knowing it would help comfort Rex. Later that afternoon, Jacob took Rex out for another walk. This time, he tried something different. Instead of walking aimlessly around the yard, he led Rex to a nearby park where they used to train together. He took a deep breath, remembering the good times they had there. It was a place where they had both felt free, a place where trust had been built and tested. He could only hope that bringing Rex back to a familiar place might spark some kind of connection. They walked around the park, and this time, Rex seemed a little less tense. He stayed close, his ears alert, but he didn't pull away as much. Jacob smiled as he threw a ball into the grass, something they had done countless times before. Rex looked at it for a long moment, and Jacob could feel the anticipation build in his chest. When Rex took a few hesitant steps toward it, Jacob's heart soared. It wasn't much, but it was a sign that the bond was still there. After the ball had been retrieved and thrown a few times, Rex started to loosen up. He didn't play like he used to, but he responded to Jacob's commands. And for the first time since coming home, Jacob felt a sense of pride. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. As they finished their walk and headed home, Jacob could see a subtle shift in Rex's demeanor. The dog was still guarded, but the layers of distrust were slowly peeling away. They weren't the same team they once were, but Jacob knew they could rebuild it. He had to believe that they could. That night, as Jacob lay in bed, he heard the soft sound of Rex's paws padding across the floor. For the first time, Rex climbed onto the bed, lying beside him, but keeping his distance. Jacob smiled softly, reaching out to stroke the dog's fur. "We're getting there, buddy," he whispered. "We'll get through this, together." Chapter 4. Breaking Through. The days after their walk in the park were quiet. Jacob and Rex settled into a new rhythm, one that was tentative but healing. Jacob had learned not to force things with Rex. Every movement the dog made, every step he took, was a victory. Slowly, Rex began to show signs of comfort. He would lie on the rug next to Jacob in the evenings, his body language less tense than it had been before, though it wasn't the playful, energetic dog Jacob had once known. There was an unspoken connection starting to form again. For Jacob, it was a beginning, but deep inside, he knew they both had a long way to go. The next week, something unexpected happened. Jacob had decided to take Rex for another walk, this time on a different route, one that led to a trail in the woods they had used to walk together before. Jacob wasn't sure if it was the right time yet, but something told him it was worth trying. Maybe the familiarity of the path would trigger something in Rex. Maybe the deep scent of pine and earth would bring back some memories. They set off in the late afternoon, the light soft and golden as it filtered through the trees. Rex, though still hesitant, kept pace with Jacob. His eyes scanned the surroundings, alert and cautious, but he no longer pulled away at every unfamiliar sound. Jacob smiled to himself, but the smile was bittersweet. He wanted Rex to feel safe again, to feel like the dog he used to be. But he also knew that the past was not so easily erased. About halfway down the trail, Jacob stopped. There, in a small clearing, was an old log they used to rest on after a long walk. Rex had always enjoyed sitting there, gazing out into the distance, as if processing everything they had experienced together. It had been a spot of calm in the chaos of their old lives. Jacob sat down on the log, patting the spot next to him. "Come on, buddy," Jacob murmured. "You used to love this spot, just like old times." Rex hesitated, looking at the log, then at Jacob. His tail flicked slightly, the first sign of curiosity Jacob had seen in days. Slowly, cautiously, Rex walked over and sat down beside him. It wasn't the same as before, but it was something. Jacob could feel a sense of accomplishment, but there was also a weight in his chest. He had missed the way they used to sit together in silence, understanding each other without words. Now, it felt like they were both still figuring out how to be together again. They sat there for what felt like hours, the world around them quiet except for the rustling of leaves in the wind. Jacob thought about the war, about the long months they had spent in dangerous places, facing impossible odds. They had been partners in every sense of the word, but now, everything was different. They were both carrying burdens that no one else could see. When they returned home, something in Jacob shifted. For the first time since Rex had come back to him, he felt a deep need to help Rex in a way he hadn't considered before. He had been so focused on his own healing that he had overlooked the fact that Rex was still suffering from the trauma of war. The dog had been through so much, just like him, and though he had tried to help him by simply being there, Jacob realized that Rex needed more than just his presence. He needed to heal in his own way, on his own terms. The next morning, Jacob made a decision. He was going to take Rex to a professional animal behaviorist. It was time to face the reality of the situation. Rex had been through too much, and Jacob wasn't sure he could help him on his own. The idea of taking that step made him nervous, but he knew it was the right thing to do. At the animal behaviorist's office, Jacob explained Rex's history, the war, the trauma, and the struggles they had both been through. The therapist listened carefully, asking questions and taking notes. She was kind but direct, explaining that Rex had likely developed PTSD, just like his human counterpart. It wasn't uncommon for dogs who had served alongside military personnel to experience trauma. They had seen things no animal should ever have to witness, and those experiences often left deep emotional scars. Rex will need time, the therapist said softly, looking at Jacob. He's going to need structure, patience, and understanding, just like you. Jacob nodded, a lump forming in his throat. He had been so focused on getting Rex to return to normal, to be the dog he once was, that he hadn't realized the journey would take time. But this conversation, this realization, felt like a breakthrough. Over the next few weeks, Jacob followed the therapist's advice. He began implementing a new routine with Rex, one that included structured activities and positive reinforcement. Every day, Jacob took Rex for walks, but this time, he introduced more training, more interaction, and more bonding. Slowly, Rex began to respond. He wasn't the same dog he had been before, but Jacob could see progress. Rex's movements became less stiff, and though his eyes still held the remnants of fear, they also held a spark of hope. The more Jacob worked with Rex, the more he realized how much they both needed to heal. It wasn't just about getting Rex back to his old self, it was about finding a new version of themselves. A version where they could trust each other again, where they could move forward together. Jacob had once believed that the dog was the key to his own healing, but now he realized it was the other way around. It was Rex who was showing him that healing was possible. It was Rex who was teaching him the value of patience, of understanding, of accepting the scars they both carried. As the weeks turned into months, Jacob and Rex found a new rhythm. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. They were learning to trust again, learning to understand each other's needs. And for the first time in a long while, Jacob felt hope. One evening, after a particularly long walk, Jacob sat down on the couch, exhausted but content. Rex, for the first time in what seemed like forever, climbed up beside him. He didn't hesitate this time. He simply curled up next to Jacob, resting his head on his lap. Jacob smiled softly, running his hand through the dog's fur. "We're doing okay, aren't we, boy?" he whispered. Rex let out a soft sigh, closing his eyes as he relaxed against Jacob. It was a small moment, but it was everything. Jacob knew the road ahead would still have its challenges, but they had come so far, and together, they could face whatever came next. Chapter 5. A New Beginning. The days following their reunion marked a turning point for Jacob and Rex. Healing wasn't a destination, it was a journey they were navigating together. One quiet morning, Jacob woke to Rex sitting by the door, waiting for him. It was a comforting routine, one that helped ease the weight of the past. After preparing breakfast, Jacob grabbed Rex's leash. "Ready for a walk, buddy?" he asked. Rex's ears perked up, and Jacob smiled as the dog's tail wagged. As they walked through the neighborhood, Jacob noticed the difference in Rex. The tension was gone, the dog was more confident. Their bond had deepened through the hardships they'd faced. Jacob took Rex to the park, a place filled with memories from their past training sessions. There, they played fetch, and Rex showed the same energy he once had. After an hour of playing, Jacob sat on a bench, Rex resting at his feet. The sun set in a golden hue, and Jacob whispered, "We made it, buddy. We're okay now." Rex's tail gave a soft thump, as if acknowledging the sentiment. With a deep breath, Jacob realized that while they may not be the same as before, they had rebuilt their bond. They had overcome the past, and the road ahead, though uncertain, would be easier to face together.